Good afternoon, everyone. This is Lotta Hawkins, and this presentation is how to read a certificate of insurance. My company, I have actually two. My Own Lane Consultants is the sponsor of this presentation. We are a resource hub for new trucking authorities of 3 or less years of industry experience. However, my specific niche in the transportation industry is that I'm a transportation risk insurance professional as well as an agency owner. And so I'm sharing our agency information of lrmctrucking.com as where you can get a quote for trucking insurance. All right, so talking about a certificate of insurance, and I really strongly believe before you can really go into um, any subject matter, you have to know first the definition of it. So, COI, a certificate of insurance, is basically the proof of a policy that is being requested from a shipper or a broker or really anyone else that has an interest in you carrying insurance. So, here is a copy of a COI request from a very popular company that does the insurance monitoring for some of your major corporations such as Amazon, CH Robinson, TQL. So they're called Registry Monitoring Insurance Service, also known by us as RMIS. So RMIS likes to send the request directly to the insurance agency just for added authenticity, and they will request that information be sent directly to them from the agent's email. So on here, it points out again that this is being sent from um, Registry Monitoring Insurance Services, and it needs to be returned by the agent. Please have your agent email a single certificate to this particular email address, or you could fax it. So this is one that you'll commonly see as a dispatcher, but you have to send this information out. Usually they'll just again ask you on that portal, like the Amazon portal, to let them know who to send out the insurance request to. So there's two different types of forms when we talk about a certificate of insurance. The first one is called an accord, and the second one, and I actually misspelled this, and the second one is Progressive's very own certificate of insurance. So Progressive has their own type of certificate of insurance, being the largest trucking insurance company out there. They kind of can get away from this or get away with this. So you'll see there's but it has all the same information. A certificate holder box, which is on the upper left hand corner for instead of a lower right hand corner, which you'll see here shortly. It's got the information. It's always going to have who the insured's policy, who is the policy from, as well as the agent's information listed here. All your certificates of insurance do is provide the proof of coverage. So it's going to have your effective dates as well as an expiration date. And trucking insurance policies are annual terms. So it should always have an annual effective date to expiration date. But there are some cases where this is going to be different. One such is that the person may have opted to do a 6-month policy, and another is if there is a pending cancellation and there still was a request for a certificate. Then in that case, the expiration date would be that pending cancellation date, and therefore you might not see, a full term listed. As they make payment or rectify the reasons for the pending cancellation, then in fact you can order or request another certificate of insurance, and it'll have the original effective and ending dates. So you're going to have these things listed here. Your bodily injury and a property damage, that's what's going to be on most certificates requested of a trucking company, because that is the minimum in which you have to have insurance for. This is the only requirement that is mandatory, if you would, in order to have an authority, is you have to maintain a certain level, described by the type of authority you are. You have to maintain a certain level of auto liability. This next part here just this particular example had general liability. General liability is not a required field, but it does offer some highly recommended coverages. So it's going to have that information spelled out here. And this person also has cargo as part of their coverages. And so then it has a cargo limits and deductible listed on the policy. Something else a certificate of insurance has to include for trucking policies is a description of the vehicles. This is called a scheduled auto policy. What that basically means is if it's not listed, it is not covered. So this is why your brokers are asking for this piece of paper, is because they want to see everything that is to be covered with your insurance policy. All right, and here's the accord form. Again, it's 1C, not 2. So please forgive the typo. This is what it looks like. It's kind of stretched out so we could see, but it has these little highlights here so we can better understand what goes in each one of these fields. Many of your brokers in the carrier packets will have a sample of this type of form in there with the very same annotations, because this is your more industry wide accepted coverage. As I mentioned before, Progressive has its own form, but you can also get a Progressive certificate of insurance done on this Accord form. But if you want it to look like this form, you have to specifically ask for, or if they are not asking for, an Accord form. So as you're communicating with an insurance agent, we all know what an accord form is. It'll really help differentiate what you're being asked to have. So real quick highlights of what's on this accord form is double check your date. The date's very important because, if you receive a certificate that's old, it may not have up-to-date information. So checking the dates. Right here is where the insurance company is listed. Many times people get the agency confused with the carrier, and that's what we actually call the insurance company as well. So there is a motor carrier, which is, as a dispatcher, who you're representing. It's your trucking company. But then in insurance terms, the insurance carrier is the insurance company that actually writes this policy. And when we say writes this policy, it means that's where the policy is from. It means that that's where, if should a claim occur, these are the people that are going to pay out. Um, then it has the agency information. So if you had to speak to the agent, like you said, these forms, if they're being requested by RMIS, have to come from the agency. And this is where you'll find the agency information, also known as a producer. And then the insured who owns the policy. So that's going to be your company's information, or your carrier's information, not your dispatcher's information, but who this policy belongs to. Then the next highlights, it just goes over, this is where you find your terms. So this is where you can find if this policy is in effect. These are your limits over here on this right-hand side instead. This also lists any particular information. We call this special language. So if you get a broker that asks, and this is how they'll say it, make sure that your insurance agent includes our special language. They're not asking for this certificate to be written in Chinese. They're asking for certain wording, certain verbiage to go onto this field right here. And this is where you'll find that special language under the descriptor of operations. So it might be something that they wanted to include specifically so they can look at that at a glance. Then you're going to have the field called the certificate holder. And remember, I mentioned it was the upper left-hand corner on the Progressive form. Here is the lower left-hand. I said right earlier, so please excuse me, but it's the lower left-hand corner certificate holder of who should be receiving this document. That's all that the certificate holder field means. It's just the formal designation of who is to receive the document. If you want a copy for your records as dispatcher, you can ask to be listed as a certificate holder, but it doesn't really hold much more strength to that, as more than just being privy to the information on this form. Being that you're already representing this carrier, the trucking company, it's best practice to probably just have this as an insured's copy, and that's just having the owner, the insured, be listed again as their certificate holder. You'll have some brokers that's all they'll ask for. Just go ahead and send us the insured copy of the COI, and so you'll just have again the trucking company you represent's information go here. Um, this area should not be blank. This is kind of, some people believe in having master copies and then they type in over this information. That's, even though I've seen that done, that's not recommended, because in the case of loss, when someone wants to put forward a claim, and that's why they're asking for this information. They want to be able to have your policy numbers, your limits, your agent, all this information available to them, versus during the time of having to file a claim, having to go and get it and possibly being rejected at that time. So when this is left blank and it's sent somewhere, it's kind of an indication that this may have not came from the insurance company's office. And then lastly, it also needs to be signed, but you can have a printed signature many a times too. But this would be the signature of the author authorized representate say it again, of the authorized rep of the insurance agency. So basically, whoever you talk to at, in this example, the Wheeler agency. All right. You seen on the previous cert talking about general liability. I'm not going to go too far into this during this presentation. The slides are available per request, which I'll have it at the very last slide to tell you how you can request the entire presentation. But in short, I was just sharing with you what is commercial general liability. This is kind of your slip and fall insurance that you'll hear more commonly used for a traditional storefront. But as it pertains to the transportation business, it's basically covering some of the exposures for property damage, even personal damage that can happen without it being a moving violation type accident. So, an example here is it talks about, again, the slip and fall, but more so in trucking, as your truck is being unloaded, if somebody was to slip and fall and hurt themselves, again, the truck is not moving, so it's not considered a moving violation. It's not a moving accident. So what coverage do you have if you don't have other insurance? And that's what this insurance in particular can help protect you from. The other occurrences that can happen to both personal and property. So it'll cover the damage to the dock itself. It'll cover the personal injury to the person that fell and got hurt themselves. And there's also some contractual injury, which is a legal term, for just things that can happen in the wording of your contracts and having a contract in regards to advertising and services. Now, please know that this does not cover your professional liability. So right here it says it covers the non-professional negligent acts, because there's actually a different coverage that covers professional liability, meaning in the scope of your work, what is being done, is that going to be protected? Another word for professional liability coverage is called E&O. The letters E as in Edward, the word and as included, and O as in Oscar, because those letters stand for errors and omissions. So that is basically, if and especially recommended as dispatchers or anyone who deals with paperwork, to be honest, insurance agents included, to cover any typos, any mistakes in your paperwork, because that is your professional scope of work for a company. So if someone is saying it was a typo that caused damage, let's say the advertising damage, you said your service or your, the the load was being picked up for $1,000, and in fact on the paperwork it says $100, that's causing a loss for your carrier. And if that carrier now decides to sue you as their dispatcher, you can't use a commercial liability policy to cover your mistakes. That's why, and plus you're also representing the carrier. So that's a whole nother issue of not being able to sue yourself. But the carrier can still sue you as an individual, as a dispatcher, to which if you had professional coverage, you wouldn't have to worry about it. Again, professional coverage, also called errors and omissions, and we'll talk about that at a later time. So it goes into more details of the different aspects of general liability. Coverage A, covering any bodily and property damage. B, covers the personal and advertising injury. So as I said, if someone leaves you liable, they are slandering your name, infringement of copyright privileges, use of another person's advertising idea, um, invasion of privacy. These are things that can be covered by general liability policy. So you can see now why it's really important in contracts, because any of these things can happen, and this is the protection for it. And then coverage C, the medical payments, as I indicated, if someone was to be injured and they are wanting to sue your company and it's not an accident, then any of their medical, surgical, ambulatory, hospital, professional nursing, as well as funeral expenses can be covered with this policy. So this is, in fact, another policy. It is not your auto policy. All right, I'm going to kind of go over this presentation just real quickly, and it just, or not presentation, but this slide is just letting you know that we do offer small business legal plans. Having a cut and paste business really puts you at risk because it's not your individualized business. It's not what you do on a regular. So having an attorney be available to review your documents to keep you from having a cut and paste templated business is always a good practice. Specifically, what's covered here is there is an unlimited number of legal consultations in regards to your business, help with debt collection, help with any legal correspondence. So in the case of you being sued or having to respond to a lawsuit, how you write that answer is what they call it, but how do you respond is really particular. So they can help you with that. There's also some trial defense if you end up having to go to court. And then that contract and document review is included for $49 a month. All right, so back on to our Accord form. So this is just going into more detail about the different coverages being offered and listed on the form. As I said earlier, the only required coverage of a trucking company is for them to have auto liability, very much like your own personal auto liability. It's your right or proof of coverage for being street legal. But as you notice, this form is pre-populated with information covering the general liability, which we already covered. The middle talks about auto liability, which we'll talk a little bit more here in the next slides. And then there's some places for umbrella coverage, also known as excess coverage. It's actually slightly different, but for our purposes in this brief video, we're just going to say umbrella is the same thing that gives you like a bonus policy for these type of coverages. And then lastly, but not leastly, workers' comp. You see here on this slide as well, it talks about that professional or even pollution environmental liability, that if you're a certain type of trucking company, mostly dump trucks, you have to have a pollution endorsement, which just means add on to your policy. So this can be listed by your insurance agent in this blank spot here. All right, so you're talking about auto liability. This is what you need to be street legal, but it has to match your DOT authority. If you're doing back office work, you probably already know what I'm talking about because there's different classifications of a DOT authority. First and most importantly is whether you're in one state, which is intrastate here at the bottom, or if you go across state lines, which is interstate. The federal or interstate minimum is 750,000. Although you've seen the quote previously and you've probably just heard a lot of people say $1 million is the minimum, it's kind of more of an industry standard than the legal minimum. So you will be able to get more work. More brokers will want to work with you. Shippers want to work with you with $1 million policy. But to be street legal, you just need 750,000. If you're in the same state, it's going to vary by that state. Also by what type of things, again, that you're carrying, which is commodity. So if you're in the state of Texas, that 750,000 goes down to 500,000. And again, 500,000 is half of 1 million. So your pricing can literally be half of what you would pay for, but you are limited to staying in one state. And that is what is you're signing up for the DOT authority. Pricing and everything, I will give you a resource. My website, once again, lrmctrucking.com, that you can get a quote, but it's going to be based heavily on how that authority is. So if you have not yet, or your carrier has not yet signed up to have a DOT authority, your pricing may be a little off unless you just really already know this is what you want to do, and getting the authority is the next step in your process. So the Accord form, more in closer detail, more so aligned to what your truckers will see. Like I said, may or may not have that commercial general liability, but will have automobile liability. It is a scheduled policy, which means the information has to be listed below. It's going to have the policy number, the terms listed, the $1 million coverage right here. UM and UMPD is uninsured motorist, and uninsured motorist property damage is 100,000. It was just this particular policy had that. They also had the truck, which was a 2018 Ram 3500, insured for $57,000. And that's what physical damage is. It is protecting the value, the outside of the truck, again, for damages that happen outside of an accident. And then lastly, this is a cargo. They actually forgot the word cargo. So motor trucking cargo is listed here as the 100,000. Scheduled policies, only the trucks or units, because as you've seen, the trucks or the trailers, maybe it's just a bunch of trailers, but only what's listed on the policy is what is actually covered. There is not any blanket coverage available in commercial trucking. Okay, so just another look. I'm not quite sure why this was put in twice, but just another look at the Accord form. What is not on a COI, on a certificate of insurance? These things are not listed, and really the whole purpose of using this form versus the declarations page. Many of us are familiar with a declarations page from having personal insurance, and it's basically that proof of coverage that we use on our personal insurance to show, hey, I have a policy. It's going to have all your information right there at a glance. But what it also has on your personal policy is pricing. It shows how much you're paying for that 6-month policy. On a COI, on a commercial COI, you will not see pricing. Pricing varies very much from one carrier to the next. And so you will not see pricing listed as something on those COIs. If you remember, you didn't see how much was the policy. Your drivers will not be listed unless it's requested, again, under that special language. Some brokers may, have had a bad experience with the carrier. And so they want to see, is this person truly covered or not on your policy? So they'll specifically ask, can you make sure you have the drivers listed on the COI? And that's a per request. You'll have to ask for it because they will not include it otherwise. And then lastly, owner's information other than them being the named insured. So you won't see the owner's EIN. You won't see a company's phone number and those other things. except for the fact that they're listed as the contact right underneath the agency. So usually it's their mailing address. It doesn't have an email address. Some of the forms do have a place for email addresses, but your standard Accord form does not. All right, as I mentioned, that special language or comments, that's another way to remember special language. It's just a fancy word for comments. And if the company, your broker, your shipper is asking for special language, they'll give it to you. And it has to be approved by the insurance carrier as legal. So it's not you just type in any type of comment here. It has to be approved verbiage. So an example of approved verbiage is additional insured is also certificate holder. So that's a way of saying that anyone else added to this policy is actually on this particular form listed as that certificate holder. Okay. So certificate holder versus an additional insured. As I mentioned before, a certificate holder is just who is the certificate being sent to. They are not part of the policy, which means they will not receive any money for being a certificate holder. They're just proof of who asked to see the policy. However, an additional insured, much like the name indicates, being added as an insured, added to the policy, is in fact another person should time of claim or other monies being distributed would be eligible to receive part of that money because they are parts of the policy. They're also insured because of their interest in either your equipment or your company or however that may be, because there's a lot of categories an additional insured can fall into, but an additional insured is added to the policy. So if anyone ever asks to be added as an additional insured, know they're in fact asking to be added to the policy. Okay. So who can send that certificate of insurance? It's the writing agency. You can't go to another insurance agency and say, "Hey, I need a COI from Lovejoy Risk Management." Legally, as you remember at the very bottom with the who's authorizing this COI, they cannot write that on someone else's behalf, which means if you have separate policies with different agents, you're going to have separate COIs. If you have your auto liability with agent B and then your general liability with agent C, you're going to have two separate COIs, even if they're going to the same place, even if they represent the same policy. Well, not really the same policy, but the same company. So just remember, separate policies require a separate COI. In order to add a certificate holder or even an additional insured, you will need the full legal name of the company, of the entity, as well as a full mailing address. You can't ask an insurance company, "Hey, send this to RMIS." Now, we see RMIS so often, we know it, the address and everything for you, but that is a courtesy. That is something we do and can do as just being, more effective as an insurance agency. However, your insurance, or not insurance, but your certificate of insurance request can be delayed or even denied if you do not have this information. So, as dispatchers, as you're working through to or working with, an insurance agency, and you need to get one of these certificates for the broker or shipper, you need to already have this information. You don't have to have the email. You don't have to have a name of a person. You don't have to have a phone number. It would be nice because if there's additional questions on how the form looks, it'll just streamline the process, but you do need to have the name of the company and a mailing address. Right. So if you want to receive a copy of this presentation, kindly just send that request to our email at info@myownlaneconsultants.com. Again, My Own Lane Consultants is a resource hub for new trucking companies with 3 or less years experience in the transportation industry. We make sure we kind of streamline stuff. We make it very digestible and understandable for new people or people without those years of experience to kind of navigate the things that you'll need and want to run your business effectively. We're also an insurance agency, so our insurance information was actually listed at the beginning of the presentation. Let me get back to it. Oh, it won't let me. At the very beginning of the presentation, here at lrmctrucking.com. Again, that's lrmctrucking.com. That'll take you directly to the quoting website, to which you'll be able to complete the information. It'll personally come to myself. I'll review the information, ask any questions if possible, and be able to get you multiple quotes with that one application. I thank you for your time, your interest, and please reach out via the website. Here's my direct phone number. It may be a little difficult to see, but it's 817-716-1868. If you'll kindly text before you call, because I'm on and off the line all the time. If you text, I'll know how to get back with you, and we'll do so in a timely manner. Thank you for your time. Talk to you soon.